5 minutes past 10. Our talkback lawyer David Whiting is here in the studio to take your calls and help you with free legal advice. 1300 222 774. He's just completely thrown me. 1300 222 774. David, good morning to you.
Good morning, John.
You've just pulled a wad of notes out of your pocket and started leafing through, checking the 50s.
Three notes, yes. Okay. Not enough to retire on.
Oh dear, we had a caller before saying that she thinks she was given a forged and fake $50 note in Geelong. We've had callers from all over the place saying, me too, me too. The Reserve Bank have issued counterfeit detection information for banknotes. Banknotes without the printed name below the portrait are not counterfeit. A banknote without the name of the person below the portrait is not necessarily a fake. Printed names were only added from 2002. This was done to help the public identify the people who's are featured on the banknotes. So just because there is no name underneath David Unipon or Edith Cowan does not mean that it is a fake. And there are other guidelines on how to spot a fake, which are on the Reserve Bank of Australia website. So we've put in calls to various people saying, just everybody settle down. There's a lot of fake news, a lot of mythology about this stuff. So glad we were able to clear that up, although it was about an hour too late. Sorry about that. 1300 222 774 if you want some free legal advice from David Whiting. And David, the federal government's determination to reform the family court seems to be hitting a few rocks on its passage through stormy waters.
I think it's reasonable, John, if you in panel, if you ask the Law Reform Commission to investigate the structure, why are you running legislation which would perhaps make the investigation redundant? But there is, in fact, a different call. There's a call for a judicial commission such as we have in Victoria and in New South Wales.
Yep. And
in the Weekend Australian, they reported that there's a judge who's got at least one judgment outstanding for more than 4 years and another from more than 3 years ago. And so if you were a party, let's assume that you started your case 2 to 3 years before the hearing that led to the judgment, and now 4 years later you're still waiting, you would not be happy. So the proposal is if there's a judicial commission, then those kinds of issues can be addressed there.
So things like judicial commissions, which are now pretty much standard across the board in lots of jurisdictions, so that judges can be held accountable. After all, someone has to judge the judges.
Yes.
Anti-corruption bodies, which are pretty much standard across the board everywhere except almost in this country. We've got state-based, but there's no federal national anti-corruption body.
Yep.
Pretty much standard. So all of these different checks and balances, surely their time has come.
Oh, absolutely, John. And I've thought there's no basis for not having a National Crime Commission. And there's no basis for not having a National Judicial Commission, given that there are so many layers of judiciary at the federal level. I would have thought that would be an obvious solution to improve people's confidences in the system.
All right, there's been an interesting decision by the full federal court, which now will not be appealed to the High Court, over what are the defining features of being a casual worker, where you're paid an extra amount to forfeit things like holiday pay.
It's normally a 25% loading on whatever the base rate would be, and it's to accommodate public holidays. It's to accommodate, the fact that you don't get, per se, public holidays.
Sick pay, all of those sort of things.
Yep.
But now the court said, well, hang on, you might be a casual, you might get paid that extra loading, but still be entitled to it, which sounds a lot like double dipping.
10 years ago, I had an employee in the same situation, John, and the Fair Work Commission, the Fair Work Ombudsman made it very clear to me. I joined a firm, we had an employee in that category.
Someone who was a casual but had been employed for a long time?
I basically had worked for the firm for 20 years, was paid as a casual.
For 20 years?
Well, what happened was left to have a baby.
Right.
And while was on maternity leave, got paid on a casual basis, came back and the hourly rate never changed, which was substantially above what you would otherwise expect to pay if you were accruing holidays and all those sorts of things.
So they were part-time but casual?
Yes.
Yep.
Well, sorry, they were a part-time. They basically ran own hours, and the Fair Work Ombudsman at that stage told me that in no uncertain terms that person was entitled to holiday pay. And on my reading of the legislation, I reached the same conclusion.
So this has been tested and it's now pretty much been resolved, and by not appealing it to the High Court, it stands as the law. So this will cost some employers huge amounts of money.
Well, Khalil O'Dwyer, the minister, suggests it could cost as much as $8 billion, which is an extraordinary amount of money. And you want the system to work properly, but you don't want to take away people's rights. So as we're coming up to an election in the next 6 or 8 months, that's certainly a factor you'd need to take into account.
Yes, it certainly is. Anything else?
John, a lovely story out of the ACT. If your birthday was on the 3rd of July, when do you become 21? The law says the common law
21 years
rule
after you were born.
Is the day before the anniversary of your birth.
No, really?
Yes.
How?
What? Because it's a bit convoluted, but simplistically, the law doesn't recognise fractions of a day.
Right.
So on the day before the anniversary of your 21st birthday, you have completed 20 years. At every point of it. Once you got to a second past midnight at the beginning of that day, you're now completed 21 years. So there's common
you
law
completed
authority.
20 years and you're about to commence your 21st.
No. There is authority that says, when do you turn 21? The day before the anniversary of your birth.
The day before?
The anniversary of your birth.
That's ridiculous.
Well, I'm sorry, that's the common law rule.
Yeah,
that's
it's not the first time I've said the law's ridiculous.
Okay.
Won't be the last.
So the ACT Supreme Court had to decide when a person whose birthday was on the 29th of February...
the leap year.
...turned 18.
Oh, that's pretty...
And the reason why they needed to determine that was because as a minor the penalty was X,
right,
and as a person of full age and capacity at the age of 18 the penalty was Y.
Yep. And
the prosecution said, applying the common law rule, that you turned 18 on the 28th of February, and the defendant says, no, you turned 18 on the 1st of March. The ACT Supreme Court said, in those circumstances, you turn 18 on the 1st of March because there is no 29th of February.
No, and how much public money was expended in resolving this matter in some trifling case?
No idea, John. No idea. Would have been before a single judge. So.
Yeah, well, even still, thousands and thousands of dollars.
Yes.
Right, okay, well, I'm glad, again, some barristers' kids got their braces paid for and the orthodontists were happy as well.
Not on a single day's hearing, John, I'm sure.
Anything else before we get to today's calls?
John.
1300 222 774. Peter in Gippsland, you're first. Hello, Peter.
Hi, John and David. I just seeking some advice. We've got a career nurse who's been a marvellous citizen all her life and looked after disabled people and elderly people, was rushing down the road, got booked by one of those cameras in the grass, and a colleague suggested to her that she appeal against it, which she did, and in doing so made it a lot worse. She's got a massive fine, suspension for 30 days possibly, conviction and demerit point 4, and we just wanted to know, is there any way in which she can get it out of the way, pay it or whatever, because she really can't afford the time, probably not even the money. But that's
Sorry, so you're saying she's already been to court, Peter?
No, not yet.
So
she's just got the paperwork.
Okay, you want to know whether she should...
how do you know it's worse? Because under the other system, if she'd done absolutely nothing, she would have got a fine and the points and possibly... I presume she was travelling at more than 30 kilometres over the limit.
Yes, she was.
Yes. And is she arguing that it was an emergency and she had no choice?
No. She in her own choice, she doesn't want to argue anything. She just really can't stand the stress of it and wants to get it out of the way. Is there anywhere we can go or do to try and limit, particularly the conviction in her career? She's over 70 years of age.
Yes.
And the suspension of 30 days would be just a penalty on her, all the people who rely on her.
Well, she could go and ask whether or not it would be possible for the... look, there's still a possibility that the court won't move to a conviction, even if they find her guilty, but the court will still impose a fine and the loss of licence will be mandatory.
Does she have any prior convictions for traffic offences?
No.
So a clean record. It may be worth Peter's friend's time to consult a local lawyer and see what the disposition of the typical magistrate is in the East Gippsland Magistrates Courts out there.
Yes. Okay, John. Thanks, David.
So it is not compulsory for the magistrate to move to a conviction. So there's going to be a finding of guilt. There'll need to be a finding of guilt in order to impose the fine and the demerit points and the loss of licence, but it doesn't automatically follow that the court will impose a conviction if that's the real issue.
I recently helped the son of some good friends who was up on speeding and facing loss of licence, and I helped him write out what he went to court to read out. He was quoted $1,000 minimum by local lawyers. If they had another case that day, they could also look after him for an extra $1,000, which he didn't have.
Yep.
And he was going to face a heavy fine as well, which was more important than finding the money for that. So we basically sat down and wrote out a sheet of paper for him to read to the magistrate. He didn't get even 2/3 of the way through it when the magistrate said, I accept it. I understand you're not a habitual hoon. You're not an idiot. I get the picture. Sit down, and gave him a penalty at the very lightest end of the spectrum.
Which happens, John.
You can represent yourself successfully if you put in a bit of prep.
If you want to represent yourself, my recommendation is you go to the court a couple of weeks beforehand. You sit at the back and you see what happens and how it happens, because it's the nerves which create lots of problems for lots of people.
Yep, and this was, in fact, turned into a great learning experience for a young man who, through the process of being stopped by the police, charged, having to explain to his parents, having to go and get legal advice, finding out what it all costs, finding out what the consequences are, having to front up in court, having to stand up in front of everybody and read out, he has grown, visibly grown in stature and maturity by having gone through that process.
It's a much better learning curve than reading about it.
Or getting hurt.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's all come home very, very, very clearly. So, yeah. Good luck with that, Peter. Leslie in Geelong. Good morning. You're through to David.
Hi, Leslie.
Morning.
Hello.
Good morning. Hello.
Far away.
Over 18 months ago, I purchased a house for which we took, obviously, advice from a conveyancer. We issued her with the Section 32. The conveyancer failed to notice an easement that was at the rear of the property. We sketched out plans that we wanted to develop the property to build a modest extension. We now can't because of the easement. We can't get permission from the Water Authority, and we wondered if there's any recourse with the conveyancer.
So this is you bought a property.
Yes.
And when you asked your conveyancer to review the vendor statement, did you tell the conveyancer that you wanted to build an extension on the back and how big it was going to be?
We said we wanted to build an extension, yes.
Well, yes, but I would, it's presumably you could still build an extension. It's a question of the extent of the extension that you want.
Yes, that's a fair point. But we did say, I asked specifically, are there any easements? And which I've got the email reply back, there are no easements at the back of this property. There was something marked, which I didn't know. I didn't say, are you sure there's no easements? What's this? And the answer came back, it's not an easement. There's no need to worry.
At which stage then, Leslie, you get to the issue of reliance? Would you have still bought the property if you knew of the easement?
No, because we passed over a property the same day at auction, which we didn't have an easement. Which says that it doesn't.
Then the way you've described it to me, you would have an action in damages. The question is, though, what's the action of in damages? Is it the difference between what you paid and what you should have paid?
Potentially, or the land we've lost now, if we want, because we want to build a garage, so we have to bring the garage forward towards the property.
Yeah,
so
I see big difficulties. I mean, if you thought you were buying product A with these attributes and you bought the product with slightly different attributes, what's the difference in value in what you bought? That's your problem.
Can you ever get permission to build on an easement, even
yes,
a garage?
You can.
You can get permission to put a garage on an easement, Leslie?
Not. I've been in talks with Bio and Water. We've applied twice. We've amended our plans, and Bio and Water have come back and soundly
Is the problem the placement of the garage or of a habitable room?
It's the garage. Well, it's the garage, but it's the way if the garage has to come forward 2 metres to clear the easement by a metre, then we can't build. There won't be enough clearance between the back of the house and the beginning of the garage, if you like.
Yep.
So they've
we've
specifically said you can't build over the easement at this point for some reason, even though sometimes they say you can.
Absolutely, yeah. They say it's because the rear neighbour's got a connection into that easement, and we can't build over that connection point.
So you can build over an easement, but not where there's a connection.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Can you relocate the garage away from the connection?
We can't, and we can't relocate the connection either.
All right, you've looked at it in every direction. So, was the
Leslie, you do have an action in damages.
Yeah, was the conveyance done by a lawyer or a conveyancing firm, Leslie?
It's a lawyer.
Okay, and they have insurance, compulsory insurance.
As do conveyancers, John.
Yes.
You can't you can't be registered as a conveyancer without insurance, and you can't be registered as a lawyer without insurance.
So, if Leslie needs to now make a claim against the law firm, how quickly does Leslie need to move?
Well, if the claim is there's what I'll call a summary process where you can make a complaint, a consumer complaint, and that's for an amount of up to $15,000.
But you have to do it within how long of knowing that you've got a claim?
A couple of years, John.
Okay.
Right, so it's not earth-shatteringly urgent that you do it
no
tomorrow.
reason to delay. You may as well get on with it, notify them of a claim so they can lodge their insurance.
Yes.
And if it's as open and shut as Leslie describes, then it might not need to be drawn out.
But I really see the difficulty in working out what his damages are. That's the problem.
The amount.
Yes.
Not liability, but how much it's affected.
Yes.
All right, Leslie?
Thank you very much.
You're going to have to go and see another firm of lawyers in order to make a claim against the lawyers who failed you on the conveyance.
Oh, sounds peachy. Thank you.
All right, good luck. It's not an easy thing to do, and some lawyers don't like doing that, so there are some who decline to act against people they know.
Yeah, I would,
particularly
as a matter of practice, not act against somebody I knew.
But if you're in Geelong, where, most of the lawyers would know most of the other lawyers.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
So that might be a difficulty. Jaeger in Musk up near Daylesford, Trentham. Morning to you, Jaeger.
Good morning, Ben. Thank you very much for taking my call. What I want to discuss, the question I got is I made a purchase of several $1,000s and I paid on the FPOS machine a substantial amount of deposit. And I've since discovered on the receipt that there's no ACN number or no ABN number.
Yep.
Along with the order form, there is the same with that. There's no ABN, no ACN number. My query is that that order form, is that binding, and are they in breach of any act?
The answer is yes and yes. It is binding. It's still a contract. If you're buying from a business that doesn't quote an ABN, you sort of get interesting issues from your point of view about how much you're supposed to pay. You don't even know whether what you bought includes GST or doesn't include GST, because you've got no way of checking if the supplier is registered. If it's a company, then the law says, the Corporations Act says that you need to include your ACN on every company document, and a receipt is a company document. Mind you, they're fairly flexible when it comes to business cards because there's only so much you can put on a business card.
So is Jaeger at the point where someone's in breach, but it's just a technical breach and won't have any bearing on any dispute?
It's unlikely to have. It doesn't have any bearing on the validity of the contract.
Right.
But if you were going to claim a GST input credit, you need to know what the ABN is.
Yeah, you might have trouble at the tax side of things. All right, Jaeger?
Okay, thank you very much.
But you've still bought them.
I'm in the interim of it still.
Okay. Well,
because I don't feel they've been up front, and I don't feel like they deserve my business. And I was wondering whether I could actually cancel that contract.
Not on that basis.
All right.
Okay. Thank you very much, man.
Good on you. I've got a couple of text messages from people, one of whom claims to be a plumber. You can build over a council stormwater easement with consent from the council if you provide an access pit in the slab for the union, for the junction, the connection.
It depends on who owns the easement. Now, if it's a water authority that owns the easement, it's up to them. If it's the council that owns the easement, it's up to them. So if it's a sewer easement, it'll be Barwon Water.
Yeah, but if
it's a drainage easement, it'll be City of Greater Geelong.
But if you're building a garage with a concrete slab floor, but you put an inspection or access pit built in as part of your structure,
then you will generally be allowed.
Yeah.
But the problem is this is a sewer pit. It's a sewer point. No, it'll be a sewer point, won't be a stormwater point.
What's the difference there?
It'll be the policy of the water authority.
Yeah, but if anyone needs to get into it, then you've just got to empty out the cars and they can lift up the inspection hatch and get down to do the work they need to do.
Yes, they can. but it's not Leslie's choice, it's the Water Authority's choice.
They get to decide. But there's another option just for the purpose of negotiating. You might be able to make another offer of a solution there as well. Julie in Ocean Grove. Morning, Julie. You're through to David Whiting.
Good morning, gentlemen. About the, you were talking about the lost holiday pay and so forth for casual workers. How does this apply to, people like hire placement companies?
It was a hire placement company that was involved in the federal court case. If you'd like to read the judgment, if you're having trouble sleeping at night, the name of the company in Queensland was called WorkPac, WORKPAC. If you were to Google WorkPac and casual work, then you will undoubtedly find the copy of the judgment. And
you'll also find last Monday's Financial Review report about it.
Oh, right.
Which will tell you a fair bit too.
A lot of call centres, people are placed by employment, Yeah,
it's exactly the same issue.
But if they're there long enough for it to change, a casual...
The issue is regular hours, John. Yeah. It's not number of hours, it's regular hours.
Is it basically an extension of what used to be called the control test? If the employer or
that's what the existence of the employer-employee relationship as opposed to an independent contractor. So I once worked at a hotel bar arrangement, and so everybody's name was on the roster with a piece of paper with a pin in it. So it looked like they were all temporary, but nobody's shifts ever changed. It's a bit like, John.
How long did you work behind the bar?
Probably 2 years.
Yeah?
Yeah, at the airport.
Oh, Melbourne Airport. Oh, okay.
I did a couple of night shifts too.
I did a lot of bar work at various places all through uni too. Kind of enjoyed it a bit until I better not tell that story. Keith in Ballarat. Hello, Keith.
Hello. Thanks, John and Dave, for taking my call. It's to do with capital gains tax. I bought a block of land in 1997, which was 21 years ago, planning to build on it, and both my parents got sick and hospital, blah, blah, blah. They both passed away, things like that, and I just never got around to building on the block. So I've sold the block, but they tell me I'm up for capital gains tax. Is there any way that I can get out of capital gains tax or not?
Well, at some point, Keith, you decided not to build. So it's so the answer is you're going to be paying capital gains tax.
Okay, even though I've had all these health problems and things like that.
Well, the test is not the test is really whether you did or didn't build.
Yeah. Did you make a capital gain, is the question, Keith?
I would have thought you'd make a thundering capital
gains, definitely, yes.
Yeah, so then you're going to need to consult your accountant.
Do you have a house, Keith?
Yes.
So why would you not be... You're not going to get a capital gain on that bit. Why would you object to paying a capital gain on the other bit? Or would you rather pay
I did have a house. I've sold the house and I'm just renting at the moment.
No. Well, how long ago did you sell the house?
Well...
A couple of years ago?
No, earlier this year.
So, and for how long did you have that house?
30-odd years.
Okay, well, the law says you can have one property without paying capital gains tax. You've done that on one property. You can't get the same benefit on another property at the same time.
No matter whatever your health is, it's not relevant.
There's a process where I bought to build and I build and I move, but Keith never lived on the block, so he's going to pay capital gains tax.
All righty, Keith.
I sold the block before I sold the house. Okay?
That's got no bearing on it at all,
Keith. Just makes it worse.
Okay.
Thank you, Keith.
All righty. Sorry about that. And check with your accountant. Bob in Yarrambat. Hello, Bob. You're through to David.
Oh, good morning. Good morning, John and David. David, look, I've got a very serious problem that I didn't realise existed. I was picked up by the police just recently for driving an unregistered vehicle. I'd forgotten to pay my registration back in May. Vic Roads didn't tell me I'd expired my registration. The policeman was very nice and explained to me that if I'd had an accident, I'd be personally liable for all the damages.
Yeah.
And he made me leave my car there.
Yep.
Said, you're not to drive this from this point.
Yep.
You have to make your own arrangements to get home.
Were you listening last week?
No,
We
I
had
wasn't
exactly the
listening
same
last
problem
week.
from
I'm
a
sorry, I
call.
was caught up on something.
We had exactly the same problem from a caller last week.
I see. Well, my
And-
big problem was I've been an RACV member for 58 years.
Yes.
And I've got total care. I rang them and said, can you give me a tow home, please? They said, no, we only help members who have broken down.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I thought I had an emergency which they ought to help me with.
Well, it's one of the emergencies they won't help you with.
It's one they won't help
No.
me with. Now, the bad part was I pleaded and they gave me the number of a tow truck and I had to prepay $180-some
Yes.
to get towed home.
Yep.
But then it took me over a week to get the car re-registered again.
How long had it been unregistered
I've
for?
been unregistered since May.
Wow, so
the
that one
3
snuck
months.
through. Did you have to get another roadworthy for the
I
car
had
and
to
everything?
get another roadworthy, and
Yeah.
there's a queue for them. It takes a week to get a roadworthy.
Well, it depends where you go, Bob, but
Yeah, well, I traced around and I had a favour done to let me get it in 5 days.
yeah, you can get a temporary permit to drive a car on the Vic Roads
Yes, but I
website, so you
wasn't
can do
told
that.
If I'd been told that, I know now that I could have phoned from the car
Yeah, you can-
and got a temporary permit and driven the car home.
Yeah, if you've got a if you've got a smartphone, you can go onto the Vic Roads website and fill in all the details and
Yep.
get a unregistered vehicle permit
Yep.
on the side of the road, and
That's
then
right.
if you are supposed to display it on the dashboard.
Yes.
But you
so
could,
you'd
of
have to have
course.
a printer to print it out.
Well, you're not going to have one in the car on the side of the road, but you could put your smartphone on the dashboard and refresh
Well,
it.
you've got the answer.
Well, I'm
It
just
sounds
trying to
like
think-
a man of experience.
I'm
doesn't
trying to
Bob?
think it through. I have, in fact, had recent experience in getting short-term permits in order to move unregistered cars, and I'll have to do another one this week too, by the way. But yeah, look, it's caught a lot of people, Bob. You're not the first and you won't be the last, because we no longer have stickers, and we get one letter reminding us, and then that's all.
Yes, well, I believe the RACV should be doing a lot more for members in this regard.
Now, David, that puts you in a difficult position.
It does, John.
Which we now have. Well, you don't want to, and you can't and shouldn't comment, but I will. In terms of the RACV, having you brought it into the conversation, Bob, David has nominated for the board of the RACV in elections, which are underway at the moment, and we've said to David, good luck to you, but we can't use your regular spot for the purpose of advancing your cause. So I'll have to answer on your behalf, Bob. We can ask the RACV to explain their policy in not helping people with roadside suspension of registration problems, but that's not breakdown, I think, is the way they will answer it. I anticipate that response even before I make the call. David, that pretty much takes us out of time.
Thank you, John.
Look forward to seeing you again at the same time next week. David Whiting, our talkback lawyer, helping you with free legal advice.